for today's program, who will introduce some of our honored guests. Bob Andrade, Palm Springs Air Museum historian.
I've been waiting a long time for this. We've honored a lot of people, you know, and the Filipino and what they did is one of those untold stories. It's one of those untold stories, and the people of the Philippines, they never stopped resisting the Japanese occupation. All soldiers, guerrillas, and civilians took part in this effort. At the beginning, they threw food to the death march people. Even at the risk of death, they continued to stop the war. Many Philippine citizens were killed, and homes and businesses were torched. Today, we're going to honor these people. First, we would like to have the Philippine Deputy Consul General Daniel R. Espiritu come up here, please.
Thank you very much, Bob. Sir Bob Andrade, historian, Dr. Andres Lorenco, distinguished veterans and distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Allow me at the outset to thank all of you for inviting me to this occasion. We are happy to be here. It's our pride and honor to be here, and let me extend to you in this regard also the warm greetings of my Philippine Consulate General in Los Angeles, Consul General Mary Jo Bernardo Aragon. Now, I belong to a generation that has not known war. Actually, I was born 20 years too late for the Second World War. Now, we grew up taking for granted all the freedoms that we now enjoy, not only here in the United States, but also in the Philippines and in many parts of Asia. We enjoyed the freedoms, liberties of democracy. We enjoyed the prosperity of free market. We enjoyed freedom of religion, freedom of speech, all those things that people nowadays seem to take for granted because some other people have sacrificed so much for it long, long ago, long before they were born. But I also belong to a generation that realizes that the Second World War was one of the worst human cataclysms that happened in human history. In spite of the Cold War and the little wars that happened ever since then, nothing can compare to the Second World War. The epic battle was very clear then. You have ranged on one side the forces of freedom and democracy, and on the other side, an alliance of totalitarian tyranny and a purging holocaust of what I would call a champion of a racist hierarchy. We have, of course, Nazi Germany, in Europe, and of course in Asia, Imperial Japan. Knowing all of this, let me say that in spite of the fact that we hardly hear about the Second World War now, let me state that our generation still recognize this, the big gratitude that we owe to the older generations, especially the generations of the Second World War. In this vein, let me express to you not just the gratitude of an entire nation in the Pacific, which was then under America, but also the gratitude of the generations that succeeded the Second World War. Now, I'm happy to note here that the Filipino fighters, freedom fighters of the Second World War are being honored even here in America. Because I've grown used to the fact that in most of the books about the Second World War, we hardly see them in the pages. I myself am quite military history buff. I have a large collection of military books. And usually, when I look at those pages, I can only see a handful of pictures about the Filipino guerrillas, the Filipino members of the armed forces of the United States in the Far East then. And hardly do I find more than 1, 2, or 3 pages devoted to them. I feel therefore great pride and honor that you here, more than 1,000 miles away from home, are honoring them more than 50 years after the war. The feats and courage of the Filipino guerrillas and the armed forces and the Filipinos in the U.S. Armed Forces then cannot be denied. We were there even before the war. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt called for the integration, for the drafting and integration of the Filipinos into the armed forces of the United States even before the beginning of the Second World War. And so we were also there at the beginning of the first battles. At the battles to defend the Philippines in Legazpi and in Lingayen when they started landing. And the Filipinos were there side by side with the Americans when they resisted the advances of the Japanese in Bataan and later in Corridor. Historians now acknowledge that were it not for these efforts, for this valiant defense of the Philippines, the timetable of the Japanese would have advanced so much farther that the Japanese efforts would have gone down as far south as Australia. However, the valiant defense of the Philippines, the Philippine and American forces, have so disturbed the timetable of the Japanese that they were not able to advance far beyond the northern tip of Papua New Guinea. But even after the surrender, the formal surrender of the Filipino and American formations after Bataan and Corridor, the Filipinos continued to battle on. Together with some of the American forces who were left in the islands, they formed guerrilla groups, and they fought for 3 years, more than 3 years in fact, almost 4 years, preparing for the coming expected liberation of the Philippines promised by General Douglas MacArthur when he said, "I shall return." And so during the Battle of Leyte, during the landing of Leyte, which we have just commemorated within this week, last October 20, I was there also in Los Angeles during the commemoration of the landing in Leyte. The Filipinos were already there. When MacArthur landed, they have already helped prepare the landing grounds through operations behind the enemy lines. And when the Americans also landed in Lingayen, they were also there already. They have also already helped prepare the landing grounds in Lingayen before the coming of the Americans. And the battle together, side by side, with the Filipinos continue. So much so that the Battle of Besang Pass, where the famous Japanese General Yamashita surrendered, the Filipino forces were also there. We were therefore very happy that right at the end of the war, the Americans granted us our independence in recognition of the sacrifices that the Filipinos made during the war, and also in recognition of the skill for self-government that they have earned throughout the American occupation. However, today, ladies and gentlemen, in a sense, the struggles of the members of the Second World War Filipino Armed Forces still continue. Just last April, the Philippine Senate passed a certain resolution 1315 recognizing the efforts of and the status of the Filipino Armed Forces in the Second World War. However, when the same bill was passed to the U.S. Congress just last month, certain provisions which would have spelled recognition of their status and efforts in the Second World War were removed from that bill. Another bill was made or proposed, but this fell quite short of the expectations of the Filipino guerrillas. Now, we hope that with the support of the American people, we will be able to realize the final passage of that bill, which will give full recognition to the status and the efforts of the members of the U.S. Armed Forces who were Filipinos in the Second World War. It's the hope of the Philippine government that this measure will grant full equity, both of recognition and benefits to these Filipino veterans, because this would write something that's a certain wrong that happened somewhere in the 1950s. In the 1950s, the Filipinos were surprised that through a certain U.S. Rescission Act, the recognition of their status as formal members of the Armed Forces of the United States was removed. And so since then, they have been fighting for the restoration of this recognition and for the recognition of their sacrifices as equal fighting men who fought side by side with Americans in the Second World War. Nevertheless, aside from all of this, we still recognize the sacrifice and effort of everyone, regardless of race, nationality, or creed, in the Second World War, to preserve our freedom and democracy. Now, in view of this, we can only hope that armed with the inspiration of the Second World War fighters, the new generation and the generations which will come after us will never also shirk from offering the same sacrifices that our forefathers gave during their time, during the time when their devotion were required. Now, with this in mind, let me wish you, ladies and gentlemen, a successful celebration of this occasion, and I wish you all well in the days ahead. Thank you very much.
Before we go any further, I'd like to ask if there's anybody here in the audience that were in the Philippines during World War II. Would they stand up, please? My speakers, too. Okay, next we're going to hear from Dr. Lorenco. Dr. Anderson Lorenco was born in Manila on 30 November 1920. He was the oldest of 12 children in high school. He was active in school affairs and also served in the ROTC. As a student in medicine, he underwent military training in the summer. On December the 8th, he heard of the attack on Pearl Harbor in the Philippines on the local radio station. Being a medical student, he was exempt from service in the Bataan-Corregidor sector by General MacArthur, even though he was willing to volunteer. He says that MacArthur probably saved his life. Andrus decided to join the local guerrilla movement, and because of his education, he was assigned to a special espionage group within the guerrilla organization. His job was to report movements of troops, ships, and aircraft to the Philippine Army, who passed the information on to MacArthur. This information was used to determine bombing targets. After his release from the military, he returned to Manila University and earned his medical degree and practiced in Santo Tomas for 20 years. He became professor and taught medicine at several schools he founded in rural areas. He was the personal physician of President and Mrs. Marcos. He admired him as a person, but he saw his greed. Would you come up here, please, Dr. Lorenco?
I'm no longer young, as you can see. But old as I am, at age 88, my spirit for America and for the Filipinos who fought with Americans, blood brothers in the battlefield, when MacArthur returned on October 20th, in 1994, to liberate the Philippines, he called upon all the Filipinos at Pago Leyte and said, "Hearken to me. I have returned on Philippine soil, soil consecrated by the blood of American and Filipino soldiers that was an invitation for another carnage that we have to participate. My dear Consul, Deputy Consul General, my good friend, my fellow schoolmate at the Jesuit Medical School in Manila. You know, when MacArthur said, the soil consecrated by the blood of American blood and the Filipino blood, it was very meaningful. Do you know why? That meant that the war in the Philippines against the Japanese was a joint venture of Filipinos and Americans. A lot of Filipinos, not only military, but civilians, innocent, died in that war, together with the militant Americans. I stand here, therefore, to represent those who did not survive the war, my friends who died in the war, those not only in the military, but those innocent civilians, among them my father. He was a doctor, and he, in spite of the constraints of the Japanese general, he sent during midnight carloads of medicines, supplies to the hills. I, on my part, was assigned during the guerrilla days the dirtiest job. It was to be in the intelligentsia, a spy, to say. I was not to be armed. I did not have to buy a gun. I could not defend myself. And do you know that every minute, every hour that I spent going around collecting information to MacArthur, direct to Australia, I was in danger. My life was at stake, but I did not fear death because I thought that I was doing something that MacArthur wanted me to do. When I reported to Bataan Corridor Sector to fight at Bataan, together with Madlacos, of course, MacArthur said, "Andy, you are a medical student." "Yes, but I'm a reserve officer, ROTC graduate. I'm a sharpshooter. I want to fight there." "No, you are exempted. All medical students are exempted from the battle in Bataan and Corridor to be preserved for the next generation." That is the magnanimity of the general. And then he said, "Andy, be a good doctor. All the people who are innocent." So, I thanked the general, but when I evacuated to my home province in Dumaguete, Negros Island, in the Visayas, at that time, the Japanese were only in Luzon. So we took a sailboat to ferry us back to our home province. We traveled by night because if you travel by day, you could be spotted by the destroyers and battleships of the Japanese, and we certainly would sink. But we survived. And it was in the time when I fought in the guerrilla, the underground. That was the most horrendous job I ever accepted. It is not easy. You're always under threat. Now, one day, and in fact every day, we had to stand in front of the municipal building The windows are closed, but there were slits there. Filipino spies for this Japanese were peeping and pointing at people standing in there in front of the building and pointing, this one, this one, this one. Boy, I stood there waiting for my turn to be pointed. I was safe. I don't know why I was not pointed. But just the same, one day, my father and myself were arrested. We were interrogated for 1 week. And do you know what? I was lucky. I had a classmate, a Japanese classmate, who was, before the war, went to Tokyo before the war and finished at the University of Tokyo. He happened to become the interpreter of the Kempita during the invasion. So when I was interrogated, he knew about it. So he came to my side and said, passed by me and said, Andy, just murmur to me in English, just to me, I'll take care of everything. Were it not for that Japanese interpreter, my classmate, I would not have survived the interrogation. I don't know today how he did it. My father was interrogated also. But then the colonel who interrogated him was a doctor in Japan. And then when my father told the doctor, you know, I'm a doctor. I have to help the poor people in the hills. Innocent civilians. Perhaps the guerrilleros will need somebody to fight. But I'm a doctor. I have pledged to help my peoples, you know, for their health. I'm not militant for war. The doctor, the Japanese doctor, the colonel said to him, Doctor, thank you for the information. Bless you. Go home. He understood what doctors are for. That made me inspired to become a doctor. And will never forget that when I become a doctor, I'll be a doctor of all people. And I took a medical course, finished it with honors, and after that became a professor. I even became a professor at Rush University in Chicago as a special visiting professor and curricular coordinator, special assistant to the dean. That was how I was after 20 years of being a professor in the Philippines. Then, when I finished my stint in Chicago for 2 years, the dean told me, Andy, you don't have to go back to the Philippines. You're the next dean. You know what I told the dean? I said, I promised one day, because my life was saved by MacArthur, I'll do some good for the Filipino people. So I went back. When I went back, I established 4 rural regional medical schools in the Philippines for the poor, innocents, and trained the staff, because that was my promise, was my gift to the general who saved my life from fighting in Batanan Corridor. That's why, my friends, I feel that I have done my part to the bargain. I survived, and by God's grace, I was able to be personal physician of 3 presidents of the Philippines, and was a special consultant at the Philippine Senate, always with the thought that I must help the innocent ones, not the politicians, even the president now in the Philippines. Her father was my co-faculty member at UST. Her mother was our student at UST under me. And yet, I'm no hero. I'm no hero even in the war, because I just did my job. I'm lucky that I survived. I thank you all, Consul General, for coming to help, to tell the Americans that the Philippine government will always be standing side by side with the American government for anything that they have to do in world order and peace. Never will the Filipino forget the brotherhood with Americans, because I was one of those who were with these Americans who died on Philippine soil. My mentors were Americans, Jesuit Americans. You see, in fact, one Jesuit told me, "Andy, you would be a better priest than a doctor." I said, "No. I might turn out to be a bad priest." And look at them in America, the trouble that the priests have done. Millions of dollars lost for monkeying around with women and children. I could have been one of them, right? So I chose to be a doctor and established medical schools and hospitals for the poor. When I retired from the Philippines, I said to myself, I'm going to America. I will be an American citizen, full-fledged. I pledged that I was an American student, American citizen, when I pledged to fight in the war. Our units were absorbed by the use of it. I was then an American citizen, but I wanted to come to America to deserve the document that I was an American citizen. And I got it by my professorship at Rush. Now, to me, this is a moment, a sentimental moment to be with you. I stand for those who died in the night, that they never will see the dawn of liberty. I am fortunate to see that liberty. So you see, I believe that America has still the duty to protect the Philippines. Why? Because the Filipinos and the Americans fought together and shed blood, as MacArthur has said. I believe that. Never can we turn around and say, we're independent, we don't give a damn for American programs and all that. No. We are a grateful people. We know that we got our final independence from America. And the majority of the Filipinos love the democratic process despite corruption. So you see, that gift can never be repaid. That's why I bothered to ask the office of the Consul General that it is their duty and privilege to represent the Filipinos during this program. They are supposed to speak for the Filipino people of now and of the future generations. Thank you very much, my dear fellow, those who fought with us in the Philippines. Americans, lonely, alone, with a group of Filipino guerrillas. They were hoping to be attacked, but they survived. I remember them all. I have a classmate, dear classmate. I called him up. And he said, I said, Archie, why don't you join me? We were classmates in medical school. He's there in Europe. Two of his brothers served in Europe. They survived. So I said to him, why don't you join me, Archie? And he said to me, Andy, I can hardly walk. I cannot drive anymore. I wish I could attend that affair with you. But stand for me there. Yes, I will stand for you and for all the rest of my friends. One friend of mine stood up before the Japanese and said, kill me. I'm an American. Of course, the Japanese shot him. I said he was crazy. He was sick with cerebral malaria. But I pitied him. Also, I remember a Chinese, good friend of mine, the son of a Chinese millionaire. He was innocent. His father refused, a millionaire, refused to donate money to the Japanese force occupying our province. They wanted him to give rice and everything to the Japanese. But this millionaire said, there are Filipinos in the hills that need it more than you do. You know who suffered? My best friend. His head was cut. Beheaded with a samurai. It was my most painful moment to see his head floating at the seashore. Floating. My dearest friend. And for what? His father would have donated money just to save his life. No. His father said, there are more Filipinos needing this than you. You see? And you know, for all of this, a lot of us who served was not awarded anything, especially the underground, especially those who did the dirty work, working in the airfield and carrying loads for the Japanese to bring their ammunition to the hills and all that. And when we reached the top of the hill, our leader would say, Filipino said, Andy, when we reach the top, drop the load and scatter that way, skedaddle. Because there is machine gun out. The machine guns start crackling, and everyone were hiding. The group, my group, we were saved. You see, it was not fun. War is not fun. You see, aside from hunger. You see, so I'm very happy to be with you now, brother Americans, to tell you that you were a part of the sacrifices of those who died in the night to save democracy and give freedom to the Philippines. Not only freedom, but when MacArthur went to Tokyo to be the supreme commander, ruler of Japan, he showed American magnanimity. He did not go there punitive, vindictive. He changed the Constitution of Japan. He removed the power of the Zaibatsu over there, removed the militaristic group that controlled them, and therefore MacArthur said, I will change Japan to be a respected country when the peace comes, that there will be only one word in peace, no longer any war. In the Constitution of the Japanese, there's a proviso there. Never again will Japan raise an army. That was MacArthur's. You see, MacArthur was the most magnanimous and generous general. He did not revenge. Instead, he changed the country for peace. That is America. You see? Of course, he did not become president. There are others who became president. But what is a president after all? Still, he was the most honored general. He was the most beloved general for the Filipinos. Thank you very much.
What an act to follow, huh? Okay, what we're going to do right now, we have 3 people here that from the Philippines, and talk to them all. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mention I'm going to call their name, and I want to stand up. Then they can sit down again. But the first person I'm going to mention is Dave.DAVE. Would you stand, please? Okay, Dave.DAVE was born in Zamboanga City, Philippines, to missionary parents. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and the Philippines, David and a friend were Boy Scouts. They were called out of class to perform ambulance duty, to evacuate the wounded. On the second day of the attack, they had loaded injured into their ambulance. When they discovered the driver had fled. So that's when Dave learned to drive an ambulance in order to get the wounded into the hospital. On 17 December, he was to be reunited with his parents in Mindanao, sailing on an inter-island ship. But he had just painted his bicycle, and he had to wait for it to dry so he could cycle over to his parents' village. He missed the sailing. The ship hit a mine. Only 132 out of 1,100 passengers survived. When the Japanese entered Manila, they announced that all aliens who did not turn themselves in by 22 January would be shot on sight. He and his friend arrived at the compound just before the 3 p.m. deadline. David was first placed in Santo Tomas for internment in May of 1943. Excuse me, May 1943, he was moved to Los Baños. In the spring of 44, food and medical supplies were getting scarce and decreased from there. Up to 4 persons a day were dying of malnutrition, beriberi, dysentery, and other diseases. 2/3 of the intern population had beriberi. The Japanese had planned to massacre the Los Baños internees on February the 22nd, a day he will never forget. But the military had known of the mass killing proposed just 4 days in advance. They used the 11th Airborne to jump in and rescue the internees. With the help of the Filipino guerrillas, they timed the rescue by flying 9 C-47s, jumping at 400 feet from 400 feet. The jump was scheduled to coincide with the exercise of the Japanese guards at 10 a.m. After a 20-minute firefight killing 95 guards, they rescued all 2,147 internees. No Americans were killed. Only 13 wounded. They got them aboard 54 Amtraks and returned them to American-occupied soil, making 2 round trips. Thank you. The next person is Faye Bolton. Would you stand up, Faye? In 1943, the majority of people in the city of Bontoc, Mount Province, evacuated their families to the mountain towns, believing the Japanese would not bother them in those remote places. The townspeople were surprised when the Japanese army took over the high school building. Within a few days, the enemy had all the people wearing ID badges, and anyone who passed the Japanese flag was ordered to bow. Now, from here on, it's going to be her words here. This is the first person now, okay? One day, 5 Japanese soldiers came into our cafe. They demanded from my parents to show them where they were hiding 2 American fugitives. my mother got mad at the soldiers for trashing the cafe. When the Japanese sergeant got into her face, my mother grabbed a chair and threw it at him. This infuriated the sergeant. He took my father and said he was going to prison. Mama begged them to let my father go because he was sick. Thus, Mama, my oldest sister, and 6-month-old baby brother were taken away and bused to the town of Lampantoto prison. 6 months later, Mama, my sister, and brother came home. Due to Mama's quick thinking, she got released because she claimed that she could not breastfeed her baby. A week after Mama's return, we were awakened at 3 a.m. with guns fired, blasts, and the fire blazing all around us. The Philippine guerrillas burst into town and were fighting the Japanese. A guerrilla knocked at our door and told us to get out. My parents woke all 4 children, our maid and houseboy, and quickly retreated to the back of the house. Daddy ran back to the house for something. As I got near to the house, I heard a gunshot, so I ran back to my mother. A few minutes later, the maid came back and said, Daddy got shot. We couldn't do anything as waves of panicked people were running all over the place. Mama led us down the hill to my grandmother's. The next day, when we went back to our burned out cafe, we found Daddy's charred body, curled up in a fetal position. Our houseboy carried the still warm body back to our house. I could still see the blistered shoulder of our houseboy where he had carried Dad's body. We found out that most of the men had been killed, and the town square was literally burnt to the ground, embers still glowing. This was the saddest time of our lives. A week later, about 6 men came to the house to talk to Mama and Grandma. Mama called us all in and said, "Don't be scared. I'm going with the guerrillas up to the mountains while you stay with your grandmother. I will come for you before too long. Do not tell anyone that I am gone." Around midnight the following week, Grandma woke us and told us to get dressed. About 6 guerrillas were taking us up to the mountains. Grandma was too weak to endure the night-long hike, so 2 men had to carry her in a hammock while we walked. We were finally reunited with my mother. Mama was in charge of the school turned into a hospital for wounded guerrillas. From my mother, I have learned the lesson of survival and commitment to helping others. As a single mother, she managed to give all 4 of us college education. The last person, Robert Mayhew, might remind you that there's two books in the gift shop about Bob here and his exploits in there. I read them, and it's some of the best books I've read. I don't sell anything, but just let you know they are over there, and I'm sure that you can sign them if you got it. Okay, Bob was born in Monterey Park, California, the neighbor, by the way. After his father was killed in an industrial accident, he was raised by his grandmother. When his mother remarried, he moved to Los Angeles. Not wanting to be drafted, he enlisted in the Army in 1940. He was shipped to the Philippines and stationed at Nichols Field. He was on the flight line alert duty December the 8th when he saw a large number of planes. They saw the bomb bays open and the bombs released. Robert was slightly wounded on the first Japanese raid. Finally, early April, Japanese reinforced their troops. General Wainwright, who replaced General MacArthur, gave the order to surrender. The prisoners marched for 10 days. The Japanese were brutal, and many American and Filipino soldiers were killed on the march. Along the route of the march, the Philippine natives would come down to the road, and when the guards were not looking, they would toss rice balls wrapped in banana leaves, bananas, papayas, etc. At this point, Bob decided he may not survive this ordeal and started thinking about escape. On the 10th day, he made his break. He was running through the rice fields. He heard a voice and thought it was the Japanese behind him. He heard, "Joe, it's okay, we're your friends." It was two teenage boys who took him to a Catholic convent. where he stayed there until he regained his strength. By this time, he weighed 72 pounds from 165. Bob also suffered from concussion when he was hit behind the head on the march. After regaining his strength, Bob decided he could best aid the Allied cause by traveling in the jungle and recording information about the Japanese troop movements and unit strengths. He occasionally met another American who had escaped, but they had to be very cautious about moving about in large numbers. In January of 1945, Bob made contact with the advanced American forces and told him of planned Allied invasion. He began to organize the local guerrillas and to evacuate the area around Clark Field. During this period, he also met a British soldier who had survived the sinking of a Japanese prison ship that had been torpedoed by our submarines off the coast. They decided to head for a rendezvous with advanced forces when they heard an American artillery spotter aircraft overhead. Using the regimental flag that he always carried with him, Bob managed to attract the attention of the spotter, who radioed their position to the Americans. Shortly thereafter, he was met by trucks and took them to regimental headquarters near Cabanatuan. They were briefed by the intelligence people, and much of the information they had gathered was used to rework the invasion plans. Each time they met other Americans, their reception was one of awe for having survived in the jungles for 3.5 years. Bob returned to the United States in June of 1945. We're going to end this, but we're going to have a flight right now, a P-51. I think on your program there, you have the person's name. It's one of our new pilots, and of course the P-51. You probably all heard of the Mustang, and they have that airplane in every theater of war, and it's probably one of the most successful planes. And what he's going to do, he's going to start up, he's going to take off, and he's going to make hopefully some spectacular, at least 4 passes. And I hope he does something. You know, it's really hard because things they want to do, the tower's looking. We don't want him to close down this museum, so we'll see what he comes up with. Okay? Thank you very much.